Welcome to Chapter by Chapter. I will be your host. My name is Brian Thomas Kropp, and I believe that stories have a tremendous power for good. And so I write them, and I enjoy sharing them with you. And if you are new to this podcast, the way the show goes is in just a little bit, you'll hear a chapter from a book that I have written. In this case, it is part 2 of the Pearl saga called Shell Game, but we have just started. So if you are brand new, you are in good company. You can hop back just a couple of episodes and hop in at the beginning of the story if you would like to. And then once we are done reading the chapter, I go into a little bit about some behind the scenes as to how that particular chapter was written or why certain details were written the way they were, how book publishing works, which is still a mystery to me, or some hidden Easter eggs that are in that story as well. One bit of fun news, if you've been following along, you've been hearing that this show just a month ago was called the Brian Thomas Kropp Podcast, and I changed the name. Well, the reason I changed the name was that a friend of mine encouraged me that if other people are trying to find podcasts about books and stories, that you might want to put something in the title that suggests books and stories. And that friend's name is Brian Hobbs, and he too has a podcast. It's called the Brain Drop Puzzles Podcast, and you can find that wherever you get podcasts. He asked me to do a bit on one of his puzzles. So if you go to episode 31 over at the Brain Drop Puzzles podcast, it's called The Infinite Episode, and you can hear me pretending to be the White Rabbit from Alice in Wonderland. So Brian's got a hugely awesome mind for puzzles and unlocking things with his brain. And if you are into puzzles and mental exercises and a bit of dry humor, you will really, really enjoy the Brain Drop Puzzles podcast. I cannot recommend it enough. As for me, I barely understand puzzles at all, but I find the episodes very entertaining and very clever. I think you'll enjoy those things. But we will get into chapter 3 of Shell Game right after we hear these messages from our sponsors. Chapter 3. An instant later, Gabe Silver strode into the office, all Brill cream and aqua velva. He moved in the office like a refreshing spring breeze, pushing out the cramped, stale air of winter. He dressed better than his income, and his smile was broader than a roadside billboard. Gabe made a habit of entering this way, late and showy. For Evan, it had lost its charm a while ago. Gabe casually tossed his fedora onto the hat rack near the door, unbuttoned his jacket, saw Molly sitting in the chair in front of him, and said, "Well, well, well, what do we have here?" Evan slouched as he stood, indicating Molly with his hand. "This is Miss Molly Brandt. Molly, this is Gabe Silver, my business partner." Molly extended her hand to Gabe. Gabe took her hand in his right and covered it with his left. "Miss Brandt, you have certainly brightened these drab and gray offices with your presence." "Thank you," Molly blushed. Evan looked at his partner. "How's Judith today, Gabe?" Gabe didn't take his eyes off Molly's. "Fine, just fine, thank you for asking." Molly turned to Evan. "Who's Judith?" "That would be Gabe's wife," Evan said, rocking onto the balls of his feet. "She's a peach. I mean it. She puts up with a lot being married to a detective. It takes a woman of iron will to hitch her life to someone in this line of work. The job takes you to all kinds of places polite people don't talk about over a home-cooked meal. Of course, it's a two-way street. The husband must take her faith in his character like an ironclad contract. It's a tremendous strain on a relationship." Gabe helped Molly back to her seat. "I would think that's true," Molly said. "I mean, all I know about your line of work is what I see in the movies, but it looks terrifying. I doubt I'd have the nerve." Gabe chuckled and said, "Oh, it's not as bad as all that. It has its moments, but my guess is you do just fine as a detective. Look at you. No one would suspect you of anything. You could probably nose out a criminal before he knew what hit him." "I doubt that, Molly said and blushed again, staring hard at the floor. Gabe, Miss Brandt here, was telling us about her missing father. Seems he's taken to wandering and she would like us to put a collar on him. You know, tell him there's a family back home that misses him. I was about to tell her we shouldn't have any trouble helping her out. Seems straightforward enough. What do you say? Molly looked at the two men in suits. Now that I think about it, I'm not sure this was the right idea, she stood. Mr. Charles is a dangerous man. I saw a gun in his belt when I met with him. I wouldn't want either of you to get hurt. Gabe's laugh took all the tension out of the conversation. My dear, he said, placing a hand on her shoulder, we're professionals. It says so right there on the door you came through. Most of the time in a case like this, we tail the guy, we talk some sense into him. Message received, no big deal. Gabe rubbed his square chin and moved to the window behind Evan. There have been occasions where there's been a little action, but we know how to handle ourselves should that be necessary. I'm still worried, Molly said. I've heard stories about gamblers and the kind of people who they hang out with. You let us worry about that now, soothed Evan. You can trust that we can handle ourselves with the greatest of care. This is not our first rodeo. But you didn't talk to Mr. Charles. Molly's eyes jumped back to Evan. You didn't see the flash of green in his eyes. Between you and me, gentlemen, I'm scared he would kill my father rather than let him just walk away and not think two straws about it. I'm telling you, my father got himself mixed up in something truly horrible. She again dabbed at her eyes. That seems extreme for some small-time con man taking your father for a ride, Evan said, leaning forward. Did this Charles fellow threaten something like that to you? Did he ask you for a ransom? Do you know what exactly he has on your father? Molly shook her head, unable to speak for the moment. When she regained her voice, she said, Well, there was the gun, but it was more than that. It wasn't in the words he used, but in how he said the words, if you know what I mean. He made me very uneasy. Gabe walked to the front center of Evan's desk and rested his weight on it. Miss Brandt, forgive me if this comes out too parental, but we've seen cases like this before. Is it possible this Charles fellow is protecting you from what your father is up to? Like, I don't know, like he has another family he wants to keep secret. There was a traveling farm implement salesman we ran into in Staffordsville. What? Molly whimpered. That would ruin us. Oh, I must see him. Please help me. If my father doesn't get his act together and come home, my mother's sister and I won't make it. You know how it is. He's the only one bringing in any money, and we're in no position to make an honest income for ourselves. The three of us were raised to keep a peaceful home. We don't have skills outside of that. Plus, Mr. Charles isn't the only person my father's gambling problem has him indebted to. I don't know if you've met those kind of people, but they tend to be pushy and impatient, and they don't care who gets them the money or how it is given. Evan Gold reached into his lap drawer, pulled out a steno pad and pencil, and flipped to a blank sheet. That's fine, Molly. I think we can help you out. Can you give us a description of Jason Charles? Yes, she sniffed. He's stocky, like a prize fighter, and about as handsome. His head is like a pumpkin, and he has a slight limp. What time did the two of you arrange to meet with your father? Evan asked, scribbling notes. 8 o'clock, she said. Uh-huh, Evan said as he finished his notes. He set the pencil down and pushed the notebook away from him. What do you plan to do? Molly asked. We'll have one of our guys watching the meeting. We'll see what happens and play it as it comes. Best case, you get to see your father. Maybe get him to come home with you. Worst case, we can follow this Mr. Charles and see what he might have your father involved in. Oh, Mr. Gold, Evan, Molly said, reaching her gloved hand to touch the front of Evan's desk. I would much rather have you handle this personally. If it's a matter of money, Molly reached into her pocketbook and pulled out a couple of bills. She placed them on the desk. Evan eyed the two stoic portraits of Benjamin Franklin. Gabe Silver stood up with a gentle smile. I have an opening in my schedule this evening, Miss Brandt. It would be no trouble, even a delight, to take care of your situation. Relief washed over Molly's face instantly, and all her ivory teeth came out for display. Oh, Mr. Silver, I cannot begin to tell you how grateful I am. Thank you so much. Where are you meeting him? Evan broke in. At Mr. Charles' hotel, the Broadway. Fine, Evan said. We know what you look like. Stick close to Charles so Gabe here knows who to keep his eye on. And don't go looking around for me, Gabe said, resting his hand on Molly's shoulder. That'll just rouse his suspicions. You may not see me, but trust me, I'll be able to see you just fine. Molly stood and shook the hands of Evan and Gabe. I cannot tell you what a weight this takes off my heart. You are very kind to a silly girl like me. Thank you very much. Gabe guided Molly to the door. You're very welcome, Mrs. Brandt. Give your address and other information to Sophie on your way out. We'll be in touch after this evening. He smiled and closed the door behind her. Then he spun around, clapped his hands together, and in a low but greedy voice said, Did you get a load of that? It's like one of those Hollywood starlets just descended from the sky and sat in our office. Get your eyes back in your skull, Casanova, Evan said. You told that poor girl we're professionals. I really messed that up, didn't I? Gabe said. I mean, with you and Catherine on the outs. Did you want to cozy up with our new client? I mean, you got to send me some signals. I'm fine, Evan said. You should keep your nose clean, though. I wasn't blowing smoke earlier. I wouldn't want to cross Judy. And I'm not one to take marriage advice from a guy who can't keep his marriage together. Gabe reached out and snatched up one of the hundreds and folded it into his jacket pocket. Expenses. He winked at Evan. And, he said, peeking out the office window, did you notice there was more green in her wallet than this? Beauty and money. We work it right on our end, and we'll be living on Easy Street for a while. If her story shakes out, she's likely sold everything of value to find this deadbeat, Evan said. That green is probably everything she has left. Don't take advantage of this one. You saw her. She's fragile. Listen, Gabe said. This case will be one sugary sweet, open and closed gig. Yep, Evan said, slumping back in his chair. You know how to pick the good ones. Evan tore out the page of notes from his notebook and handed it to Gabe. Gabe took the sheet and shoved it into his pants pocket. Evan watched his partner as he sat behind his desk, kicked up his feet, and pulled back out the Franklin. Gabe held the bill up to the light and stared at it for a moment before replacing it in his jacket. Turning in his chair and once again staring out of his dirty windows, Evan hoped the fog would lift soon and that his business partner wouldn't make more of a mess of things by keeping his eye on the wrong target. So it seems like one by one we meet a different character in the story of Shell Game and just get a little bit of a taste as to who they are. In the first chapter, kind of got a twofer in that we met Evan Gold, who is the main boss of the Silver and Gold Detective Agency, the secretary named Sophie Landis. Then in chapter 2, we were introduced to Molly Brandt, and now in chapter 3, Evan's business partner, Gabe Silver. Now, he's going to play a very significant part in the whole story of Shell Game. And what I wanted to do with Gabe was create a certain level of dramatic irony. If you are unfamiliar with what dramatic irony is, as opposed to all the other ironies, dramatic irony is where you, the audience, have more information than what the characters in the story have. So a typical dramatic irony would be, say, in a romance, you know that, say, there's a guy who likes this girl, and you know that the girl has a brother, and at one moment, the hero, the guy of the story, sees the woman that he's interested in give this third guy a hug. Well, you know it's her brother, but the guy thinks that it's another guy that she's interested in. And so there's all this misunderstanding and a supposed love triangle and all this kind of stuff. And the tension that you feel as an audience is because you have more information than the hero does. So with this, what we're going to find out is people's opinion of people's opinion of Gabe Silver are wildly different than Evan's opinion of Gabe Silver. He was very gregarious and very nice. And I wanted to also paint a picture that suggested that Evan is not crazy when he has misgivings about the character of his business partner. So he needs to be a little bit of a wolf in sheep's clothing. And this is probably loosely inspired by several folks that I have run into over time, mostly men, who they would present themselves one way when it was appropriate. So whether that was there was a girl that they liked or there was a person in authority that they wanted to impress, they would be a certain way that was appropriate. And then the moment that person was gone or the situation changed, their whole personality changed. And they were a much, at least in my opinion, usually a grosser, crasser version of themselves. And I could never quite reconcile how somebody could be that duplicitous. But they exist. They're out there. One of the values that the church that I work at, and this kind of a part of the fabric of the congregation, what we hope is the fabric of the congregation, is that everybody is living one life. The way we would say that is that we are attempting to live an open and honest life before others. And one of the ways that gets talked about is that you should be relatively the same person no matter what situation you find yourself in. Now, there may be situations where like I may be having a conversation with my wife and we say one set of facts about a situation to each other. And then if one of our children come in, we may not change the facts. We may not paint the story differently, but we may leave some things out because those details may not be appropriate for that kid. It's still the same story, and we're still being the same parents, and all those things. So we strive to be the same person no matter what's going on. And what we'll find is that Gabe Silver is not that person. So that's just a little bit of stress that I wanted to add into you as the listener, that as we're tracking along with Evan and people's opinion of Gabe is different than Evan's, and he seems cold and callous, I wanted you to know kind of where that's coming from. But also, just as I mentioned a couple chapters ago, Athens, Kansas is loosely based on my hometown of Emporia, Kansas. And you can go back to the first chapter of this book and kind of get a read as to why I named the town Athens and why it's loosely based on Emporia. But I, as much as possible, tried to include landmarks from Emporia in the story, if for no other reason, because I've been in Texas now since 96. And moved out of Kansas back in 91. And I've not really been back since, other than for like Christmases and Thanksgivings and that kind of thing. But there's still a part of me, probably a deep nostalgic part of me that misses home. And there's still a part of me that looks at Emporia, Kansas, or at least the Emporia, Kansas of my memory as home, to close my eyes and be able to drive around town and know where I would be at any time. And so as best as possible, I try to include these landmarks from my childhood or my memory of Emporia. And there is a large, never went in it and have no idea what the clientele of this place is, but there is a place near downtown Emporia called the Broadview. And I didn't realize until I was re-listening to this chapter just now, I was looking up, hey, maybe the podcast audience would want to know about the Broadway apartments. And I looked it up, couldn't find it, realized it's called the Broadview. So there's that. So I misrepresented the place in the book. But there is a large multi-story apartment building in Emporia called the Broadview. And at least in my memory, this is the tallest building in Emporia, Kansas. And I think, let's see, it's 1, 2, 3, 4. I'm looking at a picture. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 floors. 7 floors. And other than maybe some of the dormitories at the Emporia State University campus, this is the tallest building in the whole town. So, but it is of the era, or probably was built in the 20s or 30s from the look of it. And it just kind of factors as a looming presence in downtown Emporia, which is not too far from where I've placed the Gold and Silver Detective Agency. So you can go look that up on your own. Maybe take a Google Streets tour of the supposed Athens, Kansas that exists over there in Emporia. Well, that is it for this episode of Chapter by Chapter, and I hope you've enjoyed it. If you did, please leave a rating and review in the places where you leave ratings and review. And even if you didn't like it all that much, I would still appreciate a glowing review. You can leave an honest one too. That's fine. If you haven't checked out BrianThomasCrop.com, I would invite you to do that just for the exchange of your email address. I would be more than happy to send you several stories and books and have the opportunity to keep in touch with you down the line. So you can check that out as well. And if you would like to follow along with Shell Game as we're going through it, it is free over there on my website, on the blog, or you can pick up a copy for yourself on Amazon. And one last reminder, go back and swing by the Brain Drop Puzzle podcast. I think you'll enjoy that as well. Well, I hope you have a great week, and I will see you back here next time.